Pat yourself on the back because you are right here, right now, for a reason. Welcome to the On Purpose podcast, where together we will empower ourselves and others to live lives with more passion and purpose.
How you doing this morning, Jerrod?
Feeling good, my friend. You piqued my interest on this one, so this should be a fun episode, but life is good. You?
Good. Grateful, blessed, and also ready to jump into this episode 107, The Purpose of God, Religion, and Death.
Sounds like some controversy.
Always. Always. Controversy can be good.
Yeah, no, I think it'll be interesting. We both recently went through the whole death aspect of trying to understand the meaning and purpose of that. And I think our belief systems help us deal with that. Like both you and I processed through that, and it was kind of fun for us to share those stories together. Of our cries and our sobbing and Well, we did a whole episode on men do cry. Real men do cry.
Yeah, the most underrated human release, in my opinion, is crying, man. Because I'll tell you what, my body was like, when I sobbed for my grandma, it was the first time I had cried like that, and I think like 14 years, and I was like, whoa.
Right.
I think I need to let myself cry whenever I feel that come up.
Yeah, good. So I'm gonna kick this one off to you, my friend. What are your thoughts on this topic, and what do you think's in it for our community? What's the importance of this?
Well, I'd like to start out with the purpose. Yeah. And then, our community, every individual listener can kind of decide what the importance is. But I believe that the purpose of believing in God or religion or having spirituality is for structure, is for order, because at the end of the day, we are all human beings, but we're also animals, right? So if we had no structure or order or beliefs, then we would simply just be run by our compulsive desires, and there would be a lot more killing, a lot more betrayal, sex, no order in sexuality, no order in violence, no structure. And there's a very, very insightful book called A Brief History of Humankind by a man named Will Durant. And he's a historian, philosopher. I think he won some sort of award, not like the Nobel Peace Prize, but something like at that level. But he wrote, The Lessons of History was a book that Will Durant wrote. And I actually listened to it on audiobook, and I love how he speaks. He's been called one of the greatest minds, one of the greatest human minds of all time. And I remember listening to the audiobook, he says in his voice, he's like, unfortunately, history does not support the idea of a God, and religion. All the books, even in the books, tell you that they were written by a man's hand, even if it was delivered through God. However, God does support the idea of human civilization. And he really goes into how if we didn't have these stories that created morality, that created good and evil, that created bad and good, that we would not be able to function as a human civilization, because we needed people to have fear in a lot of destructive habits and behaviors that sometimes seem to be natural. So I believe that the purpose of God or religion is for order and for the opportunity to have flourishing societies.
Interesting. So for our community, I think one of the purposes of this episode is for you to realize not everybody has to agree with you on everything. So you may have different views on this, and that's fine. You may think we're completely wrong, and that's completely fine. But we owe it to each other to be able to sit down and have talks and understand why people believe certain things. And quite honestly, when I look at our world is so divided and all the stupid stuff going on, a lot of it is because we're intolerant of each other. And for me, that's what I go to as I was making some notes on this. I think the purpose of God and religions was to organize men and women for the greater good, because without understanding there's something bigger in the world, which is what religion is, right? Like, it's designed to let us know we're a piece of something bigger in the world. We're supposed to serve, and that's why we fast, to suffer, to expose that, and all those different activities. To me, it's all designed because we are selfish, and without any understanding of something bigger than us, men and women act selfishly. They act in their best interest, and I think that is why the attack on our religions now, whether you believe in Christianity or Islam, or you're a Buddhist, or you're an atheist, so you believe that you don't believe, that's still a belief. The attack on all of those is bad for us as a society. Because if we don't have the greater good in mind, it's easy to be selfish. And if you look at our politicians, you look at our leaders, they're acting in very selfish manners. They're taking more power for themselves. Their bank accounts are getting fuller while the masses are getting poorer. But what are they attacking? They're challenging your beliefs, and they're making you want to act more selfishly. So I think, to me, that's the greatest purpose of religion and God, is to help man not be selfish.
Yeah, agreed. Because at the end of the day, you're right. We are selfish human beings. So if there was no idea of religion or God, because that's where morality was born, is through these philosophies of religions and of God, and that's kind of where morals came from. They're tied to religion, that you would just do whatever you felt like doing. If your neighbor pissed you off, maybe you would just kill him. If you saw an attractive woman, and you would maybe just try and have sex with her, and just like whatever you wanted to do, you would just do. If your neighbor had an abundance of food, you would just steal their food. There was a point in history to where this was needed to build civilization. So what about the
It unites
purpose of
people,
what
right?
does?
Religion, the belief, it brings people together, which is, before we were organized by tribes or region. Now, with everybody being able to travel and stuff, as much, religion's one of the few things that organizes people. And and unfortunately for us right now, whether you believe all the religions or not, isn't, we should allow and understand that we need that. We need people to find more common ground with each other, instead of just focusing on all the differences. And that's why it's scary to me. And I tell you guys openly, I'm not the biggest church goer. I don't study the Bible. Like, I can't quote you all these verses. But I do see that when people believe in something greater than them, and they come together and take care of the needy within their group, and they help people that are struggling, we're in a better world. And when we're selfish and we're at each other and we just look at each other as enemies, that's a dangerous place to be, and it's a sad place to raise our children.
Yeah. So Jerrod, you have a unique perspective, because I would say that you're a very spiritual person,
Agreed.
yet you would claim that you're not a very religious person. So what what is God to you, and what do you believe in?
Man, I believe that, that's interesting. I get this from my grandma, who's, that's My grandma Jean passed away when Trey was 3 months old. That's what she always said. Like, she was very spiritual, so she was very much into nature and appreciating the birds, and that she knew God like put stuff in her path. So to me, I think that's what I believe, right? I believe that nothing happens on accident, that everything has a purpose in my life, and the challenge is, will you find that purpose? And even going back to last week's episode, where part of my purpose is to be open and love all the chance encounters I get versus judging and determine if this person fits in my life or not. So that's what I believe. I believe God um, is a spirit, right? They are overlooking us, and they lead you to put faith and just trust blindly that you're on a path for a reason, and you don't have to have all the answers, but that the universe is going to put you in that place where you're going to be where you're supposed to be at the end of your days. And I know for me, when I've struggled the most is when I fight that, and I try to create my own path or map out all my own journeys instead of just being open to what the universe is leading me to do. About you? See, now it's interesting to me because you being raised a Muslim Catholic, and like some of your stories where your dad was telling you your abuelita was going to hell, and like, how do you balance that? And how did you choose what to believe and what not to believe? Because they both very passionately believe they're right.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was that was really the start of my religious / spiritual journey, right? Was that moment when my father told me, your abuelita and your mom and your whole Mexican side of the family is going to hell because they're Christian, right? I was like, what? And he kind of meant it jokingly, but also serious. And that's when I decided there's no way that just one religion can be totally right, because I had been in churches and I had been in mosques, and both sides of my family had read me some of the Quran, read me some of the Christian as a 5-year-old, right? So I feel very grateful and blessed to have been told that by my father, because that invoked a big questioning in me of like, now I must question everything, right? Even what people tell me this is the truth, I have to be like, well, why is it the truth? How? And I question that. We just had Easter recently on the time that we're recording this episode. Easter just passed, and I remember my grandfather was extremely involved in the Catholic Church. Every Easter he would do a play in downtown San Antonio. For the Hispanic community, it was all in Spanish, and it was a reenactment of Jesus Christ. And he was huge into religion. Point being that I was very fortunate to learn a lot about both. And now, fast forward to today, I won't tell you I am a Christian or I'm a Muslim or I'm any religion. I consider myself a spiritual person, and I choose to adopt certain things from certain religions that resonate true with me. So, for example, I'm gearing up for Ramadan coming up, a whole month of fasting and living in solidarity with those who experience hunger and thirst for real on a daily basis. Is it fun? No. Is it hard? Yes. Does it interfere with day to day? Yes. It's a very difficult, very disciplined thing to do, but there's something indescribable that happens to you that's beyond just the 5 human senses, right? It's not something that you can touch or smell or see. And that's what the realm is, right? Some spirituality is something that's beyond your physical senses, that happens to you when you do that. And that's when you really recognize what some people call God or energy or spirituality or the universe, when you can feel something that isn't in the physical realm. And that's what happens when I do Ramadan, right? You can maybe even, some people who are avid meditators, you may reach this point to where you feel something that's beyond your physical senses. I think even atheists, right? We can feel people's energies. We can feel things that are intangible. And that's kind of where I've gotten to, is I can't tell you I know for sure that God is this huge white bearded being in the sky that measures all of our sins, and that there's a heaven and a hell, and what happens after death. Nobody can tell you that, right? And if they do tell you they're certain, then they're lying, because nobody can be 100% sure. But I think there are some things that in our experience, when we do what's called, prayer, or even gratitude, or affirmations, or meditations, these things that are at these highest vibrations, that we can feel what a lot of people in the world may call God, spirituality, universal energy, all these things. So for me, I consider myself a spiritual being, and I believe that there is truth in every single religion. Even, and I'm not very studied up on atheism, or satanic worship, or anything like that, but I believe that there's probably a lot of truth in that stuff too. I know there's truth in in Christianity. I know there's truth in the Quran. I know there's truth in Judaism and Buddhism and Hinduism. So my biggest advice to people who are seeking kind of their spiritual path is, don't feel so limited, because I felt that for a little bit of, being like, oh, well, I guess I'm supposed to be a Muslim, so I can't go to a church and like learn what they're doing, or that's blasphemy if I do that. No, I think that we're all going to be better, higher level spiritual beings if we do converse and open our minds up to any and all religions and belief systems.
And I would even add to that Mother Nature, right? Like I found some of the best answers to my deepest questions and my deepest problems and my internal stress by just getting out and allowing nature to speak with me. And right, and so to me, that is part of my spirituality, is being in nature and being one with nature and just embracing it. And I know people are like, oh, you freaking tree hugging hippie, you're crazy. And trust me, I never used to be like this. Like, this is a fairly recent development for me, but it really took a turn during COVID and the quarantine, and I was getting some panic attacks and anxious moments. And the only thing I found that really helped was just getting away from everything and hiking and hearing the birds and seeing the deers. And so do you think Mother Nature and just nature in general can be spiritual and part of your spiritual development?
100%. I mean, who created Mother Nature, right? The creator, God, the universe, whatever you want to call it. That there is huge benefits in Mother Nature. And again, things you might not be able to physically see or feel, but every day we're reacting to Mother Nature. We're inhaling what the trees are exhaling, and vice versa. We can't see that. We don't see the trees breathing, but without Mother Nature, we would cease to exist. It's a third of anxiety disorders, and I got this statistic from research from the Dalai Lama's research team, that a third of all anxiety disorders come from lack of time in Mother Nature. And that's why, even though today we are the most comfortable society, hands down, running water, electricity, warmth, clothing, we don't have to, plenty of food, everything. We have all of our basic needs covered, but are we the happiest? No. Depression, anxiety, all of these things are at a sky high. And a big part of that is because of lacking time in Mother Nature.
Interesting. Would you also then say that another factor in that would be our manipulation of our religion and our spirit worlds? And what I'm going with that is, like, you study, Muslim Catholicism in the same house. There are many parallels from the Bible to the Quran. There's some of the same stories. Yet we're constantly told we have to be at odds with each other, and that one can't exist if the other exists. So do you think that part of our overall, as a world, the unhappiness and the tension and conflict is because we've taken these words and assigned absolutism to them? That man has almost created intolerance from books that preach tolerance?
100%. Oh yeah, it's heavily manipulated, unfortunately. Like one great example is Islam, right? Islam in the United States gets a bad reputation. I remember after 9/11, I was in the fifth grade, that was the first time I had experienced any sort of prejudice and racism towards being a Muslim or having a Muslim name. And it was like, what? Like I didn't understand it at first, and how like these terrorist groups are portrayed in the news, which is a very small portion. That's not really Islam, right? These terrorist groups are perfect examples of people who have manipulated what's in religion to support their belief systems. But what is very easy to see and clearly to see, like if you do know the Quran, that it's complete manipulation. And same
Yeah.
thing with, you see that in every religion. There will be the defects of humanity arising within nearly perfect texts and truths.
So how do you balance that? Like how do you balance that? So when your dad tells you that the other half of your family is going to hell, how do you respond, or how do you come back to him with that?
In that moment, I said something along the lines with my 5-year-old self of like, no,
Well,
God wouldn't do that.
But over your course of your life, as you continued to be exposed to conflicting ideas, were you worried that one side was going to hell over the other, or how did you balance that out?
No, I think it was this. It was stuff like this, continuing to have conversations, continuing to learn more. And I think that we all have a sixth and maybe even seventh sense, right? A deep knowing. We have our intuition. Sometimes we can't explain, but you have this gut feeling, right? And I think that this gut feeling is an indicator of recognizing truth, things that are deeply universally true. Not always, right? But for the most part, we can recognize that. And in that moment, as a 5-year-old, I could easily recognize that there's no way that was true.
Yeah.
And in my journey, I have learned that as well, because I I would think about, well, what if you lived your entire life as an amazing human being, but you were just never introduced to Islam, right? And even I found holes in my father's statement very early on, because then he'd be like, actually, there is a place for people like that, like they don't go to hell. And even in Islam, it says, like, even if you are a follower of God, a Christian or a Jew or whatever, that there is a place for you with God. And it actually doesn't say that like Christians and Jews are going to hell. I think my dad was just kind of being an asshole.
So what about this? Here's something that I've always struggled with, and help me understand this from your perspective. The fact that people in their lifetime could do horrendous things to other people, and then at the very end of their days claim they find God, all is forgiven. I struggle with accepting that as truth, because if you've harmed people for your 85 years on earth, and you've been selfish and you take and you manipulate, I have a hard time thinking that it's just all forgiven without some kind of test of faith, just by saying some words, because it wouldn't that still be the same form of manipulation you were doing to take advantage of people your whole life? What do you think on that? Because that's always kind of when people are like, oh yeah, he was on death row, but he found God moments before he went to heaven, so, or before he was killed, so he'll be in heaven. I'm like, he murdered 30 people. He
Yeah.
found heaven, or he found God, because that's manipulation again. What do you think on that?
I don't believe that's true. I'm the guy who will have I'll stop and talk to the preachers on the corner,
Okay,
right?
stop. You don't believe what's true? What I said is true, or what they told me?
I don't believe that if you proclaim Jesus Christ as your Lord and
Okay,
Savior, that all of your sins are forgiven and that you're good. That's
immediately.
been my biggest argument with Christianity, right? Of, well,
Yeah.
if you claim that and all is forgiven, then what is the importance of living a good, loving life?
Okay.
Then there's no point. So I completely agree with that. And then we'll get there here in a bit, but then we'll have to talk about what we believe happens after death, right? I no longer believe that it's just you live one life and that it's heaven or hell for eternity, right? I believe it's a lot more complicated than that. And since reading the Lessons of History by Will Durant, I've realized that Christianity, Judaism, and especially Islam, when it comes to humankind, are very, very young religions.
Yeah.
There's so many religions and belief systems that came before these three that aren't talked about in our society much today. You really have to go deep into these readings and stuff. And a lot of these older readings, like the concept of heaven and hell, um, is kind of a newer concept as well. So I think it's a lot more than that. But I think what is interesting about death, like let's say you're a criminal, is that everybody in extreme suffering, nearly everybody starts to believe or look for a higher power. One of my favorite quotes actually by 50 Cent, in a song, he says, I see even gangsters get religious when they start bleeding. When you're shot and you have a bullet hole in your body, you're going to say, please God, help me. Please God, when you have extreme stuff. And I've had this same experience, even in times in my life where I have lacked spirituality. I have lacked religion. In college, I would say was probably one of the most like least spiritual, least religious times in my life. But I remember anytime I was extremely sad, and I'm sure a lot of people can relate to this, extremely sad or in a very, very low, dark place, you start to believe that there's got to be something more, right? I've heard so many people say, like, I didn't believe in God, but I was at the bottom of my life. I said, please God, help me. Then God gives you a blessing, and then you're a believer, right? So I think it's interesting to where when we're in the highest times of suffering, that's when we seek a higher power the most.
Yeah, that's interesting. Anytime you can reference 50 Cent, like that's gonna be a pretty interesting podcast. Yeah, I don't know, man. I've always struggled with that, and I 100% agree with you that well, if I just repent at the end of my life, then all is forgiven. Takes away the responsibility to live a meaningful life day to day. So that's always been one of the struggles I had. What do you think about those that try to make us believe like we can only believe one thing? Right, like you have to be Muslim, or you have to be Catholic or Christian, or I know they're the same thing. I'm just saying different denominations there. What do you
I
say to
think
that?
I think that at the time these religions were created, we're talking thousands of years ago, right? That level of commitment was needed for us to have structured civilizations and to operate as societies. But I think that us as a collective human beings, that we are now more capable of having a little bit less rigid ideologies, right? But I think that in order to run a society, you needed people to believe, hey, if you lie, cheat, or steal, like you're going to hell.
Yeah.
If you do this, and that, like you're going to hell. If you believe in anything else, you're going to hell. Because we needed this order and this control in order to get to where we're at. But now, just like we were talking earlier, now we have all of our basic needs, right? We have these incredible systems, economies of scale, food, all this stuff, to where we have all these base needs covered, and we're much more intellectual, much more spiritual beings. We're the most advanced that we've ever been as human beings, right? And I believe that now we have a little bit more flexibility in our beliefs. But when you are true to a religion, 100%, you're gonna pray daily and be committed. These frameworks that these religions have laid out are it's pretty hard to argue that they won't lead to pretty fulfilling lives with very low amounts of suffering.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't know, man. I struggle at times with, I don't well, obviously the extremism of anything is bad for us, right? That's where nothing good comes out of being an extremist on either side. Um, but for me, I find I do agree with you that I think I'm more spiritual now than I've ever been, more in touch with my spiritual side and leaning into it, which is a balance, right? Like I love talking to Pastor Darren and getting his view on things. And some of the books we're reading have spiritual leanings. But I think to me, where I find most effective is when I allow all of my spiritual self to be developed, not something based off just one perspective. You know, like I've been enjoying reading Native American books lately, and their connection to the moon and to the seasons and, you know, nature, and that was their spirit. That's where all their spirits and their gods came from, the earth, and how they tried to live with the earth, not manipulating the earth. So I don't know. I think to me that balance is where I'm the happiest, and where I'm able to serve the most is being open to all the ideas. And I do think if we could get more people just to be open and not be so convicted that their way is the only way, we'd have so much more peace on earth. Because I mean, ideally these books were designed to give structure and to give you something to the greater good, but now it's only for the greater good that believes it like you believe. We've lost the greater good, and is also for people that don't believe what you believe.
Yeah.
So what do you think happens after death now, Ali? What do you think? Where's our spiritual journey go?
Well, I definitely believe that something happens. I don't think that the lights are off and that's it. I believe that there is another realm, that we are spiritual beings having a human experience, that I mean, that it's something that it's almost similar to a dream, right? You're not conscious, you're not awake, you're not physical, but stuff is going on when you're dreaming. Sometimes your dreams are so lucid to where you have a little bit of control over what you're doing in them. I believe that and of course I can't prove this, but I believe that your spirit leaves your body, and that you're in this spiritual realm, potentially with other spirits, and that you have a little bit of control of what you're doing with your spirit. And I think that you have options and you have choices. I have been learning more over the past several years about the concepts of reincarnation, and I do believe that as a spirit or a soul, that you can come back, you can be reincarnated into a physical being, um, with very limited awareness of anything that happened in the past, right? Because you're choosing to kind of restart. But I think that I've let go of the idea of there being like the judgmental, like one white bearded God who's like heaven or hell. Um, I think that there are concepts of that, and that maybe as a soul spirit, if you were, a very evil person that really did a lot of hurt and damage in the world, there will be some lessons, potentially some painful lessons, that you need to learn in the spirit realm before you can come back and reincarnate, if that's what you choose. And then I also believe that, if you felt you've learned enough, that there's plenty to do in the spiritual realm, that you don't need to come back. So I think, I wouldn't say I'm excited to die and find out, but I would say that I have a lot less fear than I ever have.
So that was going to be my
dying.
next question. That was going to be my question for you: is do you fear dying?
I'd be lying if I said I had no fear at all, right? I think whenever there's anything that you go into, like even my move right now, I have a little bit of fear, because I don't know I have no idea what's going to happen when we get over there, right? I have some thoughts, but it's really, I'm not going to know until I get there. And it's the same concept with death. You're not going to know when you get there. So why stress out and be extremely fearful? So no, I don't have a lot of fear. What do you think happens when you die?
I don't know, man. I really don't know. I don't believe that that's the end of your journey. Now, like, a lot of the Native American stuff talks about you come back kind of a spirit animal, and like they talk about like an eagle coming down in their time of need. That was related to their grandfather who passed away because he believed, so I like that. I like thinking that I'm going to come back and serve in some other capacity, as an animal or something in nature, whatever. So I know there's more, so I don't fear dying at all. But I do fear dying with regrets or dying with things left unsaid or jobs left undone that I was capable of doing. And that right there is what's motivated a lot of my life. Is from what I've seen in my experience, the people that really fear dying and don't want to die are those that didn't live enough and held back on what they could have done and who they could have become. So that's my biggest fear is, if I die today, did I do all the stuff I was supposed to do? And and I'll be honest, I don't need a book to guide me on that. I don't need a lot of prompting from others to be a good person, and I think religion helps with that. It helps ground you, and for people that are struggling, I think it's a great framework. But for me, I'm more intrigued with, when I die, I want to move to the next place where you get to keep experiencing and keep sharing and keep leading. But I would love to be an animal, to be honest. Like a dolphin or a bald eagle. I either
What?
want to swim super fast or fly. Dude, I have so many dreams where I have flying as my power.
Me too.
And I know they tell you that means something, but I think for me, I think it means like maybe after this life, I do get to be a bird.
Yeah, maybe. And death is necessary, right? It's the great equalizer and it's the great catalyst to living. Because if there was no death, we wouldn't be doing shit, really. There would be no incentive to
Exactly.
build your legacy, to do good. And like if you had infinite time, I can't even imagine what that would be like. Like that, I'm grateful for death.
Yeah, there'd be no urgency.
No urgency.
Right. And that's really why people, get to certain ages of life and they start having what, sometimes we call midlife crisis, or they start doing things that were abnormal because they're starting to see their clocks running down, and on the flip side, you also see people that have been hardcore their whole life, like a lot of grandpas, right? You hear stories all the time, like, oh, we love grandpa, he's so nice and kind, and your parents like, oh, he was the meanest son of a bitch ever when he was younger. Well, why do you get kind? Because he sees his life, he knows he's coming near the end. He's a little more gentle, and death is absolutely necessary, much like having a timer, having 3-minute rounds of a fight is necessary. If you could fight forever, you're gonna have a much different pace, much different output than if you got to get it done right now. That's kind of with life. I think sometimes we get lazy and we forget there is a timer running on us all the time.
Yeah. So I want to, as we come to close out this episode, I want to say that in so many religions, there's this concept of God making us in his self-image, or God being within us always, and or all of us like representing God. And with some really close people dying recently in my life, I've had quite some time very recently to really reflect on death. And I want to read a tweet that I shared at the Lebanese Lion is my handle. If you guys want to follow me on Twitter, that I shared when I was in some deep introspection about death. And I said, when someone you love dies, the story about how or why is completely up to you. Choose a belief that best serves you. You are the creator of your life story and the decider of what everything means. So I had one of our close friends die from a hiking accident, and it was really difficult because she was so young, and there was also some speculation around, like, could it have been a suicide? Was it an accident? What? And just so many different paths to go down. And it was stressful to go down all of those paths. And I finally came full circle and decided that I'll never know. Just like none of us will never know in this life what happens after death. But we do have the power to choose and decide what we believe about it, just like we have the power to choose and decide what we believe about anything. So that's why I think it is important to read multiple religions, have many conversations, because you never know what truth is going to resonate with you the most. And then that's when you can be like, that's what I decide is true for me. And it might be a mix of some Islam and some Judaism and some Hinduism and whatever it is. But remember that you are the creator of your life, of your beliefs, and the story you tell yourself. So choose the ones that are going to choose the story that's going to best serve you.
I love it. Yeah, I appreciate that. That was good when you shared that. That's good today. So I appreciate you, Mr. Ali, and community. We'd love to hear your feedback on this episode, and as all of them. You know, you can always join us on Patreon to continue to help us grow our purposeful community. And the reality is, we're not afraid to talk about things that other people won't talk about, even if we don't all agree. I mean, that's the beauty of what we do. And remember, team, life is far too short to live any other way than on purpose. We will see you all again next week.